Hello, everybody. It's Max with Crypto Talk now. With Quant, could they possibly become the premier Web3 service provider? Now, let's take a moment to basically reflect upon just that. Now, if you think about it, what does ISP stand for? Internet Service Provider. And of course, when we go about 30 years back, we could really take a moment to understand how we went from the likes of dial-up to the likes of broadband, and if anything, the limitations of those particular times of the internet compared to the likes of now. But with Quant, it really sets itself ahead of the pack because of the interoperability, being able to have blockchains talk to each other, especially ones in which you never thought would be able to do just that. And how about this? Even from a legacy point of view, the likes of Ethereum, Bitcoin, and so on. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's Quant coverage. So as we can see right here, and again, shout out to Quant Papa, who always comes up with the great clips. Highly recommend you follow him. But check us out. Web3 infrastructure provider Quant. This is, of course, a recording from Gilbert Verdian, CEO of Quant. About 2 minutes and 18 seconds. Listen to what he has to say with this, and of course, we'll come right back.
Just a point with what Richard was saying. We're making the same mistakes as an industry and as a society as we did 30 years ago when the internet evolved to what it is today.
Yeah.
With the internet was really, there's two different versions. There was the OSI version and the TCP version. The OSI version was closed, proprietary, hard to implement, you had to pay to get it, and that died. And we're seeing that same lack of openness, lack of adaptability, and lack of adoption with proprietary tech killed technology.
Yeah.
And so with blockchain, we're going to see that, and there's going to be the second or third or fourth generation of blockchains that stay. And if they have openness, ease of use and adoption, and then non-proprietary.
So the weakness is proprietary?
Yeah,
okay.
And they're the ones that are going to succeed. So from an internet perspective, the ones that won out were the early adopters who implemented the infrastructure for the internet. So the Cisco's, the ISPs, Comcast, AT&T, and the service providers that provided the rails to build these applications. If they didn't do that, we wouldn't have Google, we wouldn't have Amazon, we wouldn't have Facebook.
If we play with that internet analogy, which works really well, we're starting to see the emergence of the Yahoos and the eBays. We haven't yet seen the Googles. It took a while. The Netflix. It takes a while. The Facebooks, the Instagrams. They take a decade to come.
Walled garden, closed nature of networks won't work because humanity just doesn't operate that way. We need openness. We need to interoperate with each other. So we need a network of networks to actually foster innovation. Right, and we're seeing at the board level where boards are recognizing they can only get value in their current business models to a certain level, that they can't really extract any more value in the way they operate. Yeah. So they're forced to cooperate, and what they're doing is they're making the consortiums, and boards are actually assigning the head of strategy, head of innovation to go out and look at blockchain, look at AI, look at big data, to come up with new business models, new revenue sources to stay relevant.
Okay.
I mean, there's an insurance company we talked to, that's the sole job of the person. It's been around for 150 years. The board doesn't think that company will stay around for much longer. So they're looking at tech to keep them relevant.
So there you go. In regards to that, I mean, think about some of the points he's getting across, especially when it comes to all this, right? Everything Web3 related and so on. I could give countless examples myself, right? Even from a non-crypto perspective. Now, for instance, here's one for measure. Like for instance, gaming consoles, right? So for instance, Xbox 360 back in the day, right? That was not necessarily interoperable with the likes of, PlayStation 3. Another example is even on the PC. For instance, you have somebody playing let's say Call of Duty World at War. You ever play that, for instance? I know a lot of you guys aren't necessarily gamers. The point I'm trying to make here is the interoperability. Playing a game like that, you want to play with somebody that has the same game, but that person, for instance, is playing on a console, right? Like, for instance, that time Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 or whatever the case be. those three weren't able to be interoperable. If you wanted to play with somebody, you had to play on the PC. You had to play on your native, uh, function, if you will. And it was quite an annoying thing. Can you imagine the likes of that now, right? Yes, they have solved those particular things. Nowadays, if you're playing the likes of the latest Call of Duty game, like Modern Warfare 2 and so on, and your buddy, for instance, is on the PS5 and you're on an Xbox Series X or S, right? You can play against that person, or they could play against PC people. It's all interoperable. They're all compatible with each other. You look back in those particular days of, for instance, TCP/IP internet service providers, and again, you can draw your conclusion on how things have totally evolved from then to now, right? And another thing, of course, that really, really grabbed my attention when it comes to Quant is, kind of like what it says right here, Web3 infrastructure provider. They are building upon the current infrastructure. And if anything, when people say, well, what about the likes of Bitcoin? What about the likes of, for instance, Ethereum and so on? Being able to make those particular ones talk with each other, those are enterprise, or I should say, legacy systems. That wasn't something that was able to be done before. And you have the technology of Quant being able to do things at scale that nobody else has been able to do by making those particular legacy blockchains interoperable is tremendous beyond measure. A little bit more in regards to our coverage of Quant. Again, it's straight from Quant Papa. This is in relation to the whole thing about the ISO standard, right? So basically, in March, we have, of course, that delay that was supposed to happen for November. Here at CTN, we did a part 8, one of 8 series covering the likes of preparing for November. In relation to that, we probably got to do a new one preparing for March. But anyway, in regards to the whole ISO collaboration, you definitely will see quite a bit here. Of course, I'm going to full screen this here in a bit. And basically, it mentions, just that, the interoperability, defining an interoperability framework, leveraging cloud interoperability standard, which of course was ISO /IEC 19941, which was in 2017, providing a framework to cover. But look at the key areas that they're hitting here: the governance interoperability, the business interoperability, technical interoperability. The one key thing that definitely stands out for me is the governance and business, because if anything, again, I don't know about you, but I'm into Quant for the mass adoption from not necessarily the retail scale, but if anything, what's going to happen again with these financial sectors and the governments and so on. Whether you're a fan of CBDC or not, let's face it, it's going to come. And if anything, getting behind the technology that drives those particular ones, might as well try to get, let's face it, wealthy off. I, of course, can't give you official financial advice, but that is what I'm personally looking into. That's why I've researched the likes of Quant and so on. So what you're going to see right here is a breakdown of how this interoperability works, which is great. You're going to hear about certain examples, right, that you see here, for instance, the semantic data, the syntactic, and so on. And it comes straight from who? Gilbert Verdian. So this is going to take about 2 minutes and 20 seconds, and then we'll come right back.
Packets and checksums and handshakes. That is a very what we're doing in ISO. ISO is quite a kind of like operating at a governance level in terms of interoperability. We're not proposing to define data packets and checksums and handshakes. That is a very technical thing, and that's being allowed to innovate. We want the industry to innovate and come up with ideas on how to do this. But ISO is looking at a very broad level around governance, business, and technical. What are these things that you need to comply to, and how you develop the technology? As long as it's compliant to ISO, they will interoperate with each other. So we're looking at these levels, and we're using a framework that's already been done in cloud. So the Cloud Interoperability Standard looks at these things, and if you look at that circle, they're the areas that define cloud interoperability. So in terms of what we're doing, we're looking at transport. So this is how you can actually network and connect. So the infrastructure level. So how does this byte go to the other system? Syntactic. This is understanding the formats. So how you exchange, if it's a JSON, if it's XML, if it's a protocol. It really depends on the approach. Multiple ways will work. We're looking at semantic as well. So this is understanding the data. So you're pushing data from one network to another network. Can you understand it between the different types of networks and their applications? And the behavioral. So these are the rules. If you're doing this and you exchange it, was the results accurate? What happened? And how are you going to do that? Finally, policy. This is the legal and the business side. So you want to make sure there are governance and rules in place. If something times out, then you should reverse the transaction. If you're agreeing, you should do a handshake and agree that what you're going to do, and everyone's on the same governance level. So there's a lot of work to be done in this space. And if you look at standards, this is kind of what we've done within ISO, but more importantly in ATSPA. So I'll also helped establish in ATSPA, part of the EU's initiative. And what we decided to do was to bring all of the different industry bodies together and work together on this, rather than everyone creating standards and doing things that are proprietary or only open source or only whatever. It's basically coming together.
All right, so I realize that last part gets chopped off, but if anything, it gives you a better idea of how this all works. Countless times we mentioned here at CTN that the likes of Quant is basically what you're investing into an operating system. You're not necessarily investing into the token. Yeah, technically speaking, when you buy the token, it is just that you hold so many of it. If anything, it is just that investing into an operating system for a blockchain, the operating system for blockchain, which is basically Overledger. So, my thing is this, when you hear Gilbert Verdian break down, for instance, all these particular ones and so on, like he just did, I like that. Because if anything, think about like Microsoft, right? When you're the type of person which, let's say you've used Microsoft Windows 95. That was my first operating system. I know some of you guys go further back than that. But, you're able to see like how many different applications for that. So for instance, back in those days, you have Microsoft Works 4.0 and going from that to, for instance, Microsoft Office, so on and so forth. When he, as in Gilbert Verdian, basically outlines a few of these things, these different applications and their particular functions, again, what does it remind you of? It reminds you of a solid operating system that has certain functions. And when he mentions the interoperability of that, I'm thinking, wow, that's even more powerful than any type of Microsoft application back in the day. I know it might seem a little bit like it's apples and oranges comparison, but I do want to make that comparison because, if anything, you do have a broader perspective of just how huge Quant is because of where we're at with Web3. We're talking about different eras, different operating systems, and so on. But with Quant, they absolutely take the cake and all the way on such scale that's never been seen before. All right, a little bit more in regards to our Quant coverage. There's this, of course. We just covered, of course, the whole ISO collaboration. I want you guys to see this particular one because, like it says, ISO approached me, but the history of blockchain standard and so on, you can see how Quant, has played a huge role into this. I mean, you want somebody that's kind of like, like what Gilbert outlines here, his experience and so on. If you're entering into the whole ISO 222 space of things, you want somebody who has literally created an ISO standard a few years back, right? And not just a few years back, but many years back, right? And to see how they collaborate with what is going on now with the ISO standard is tremendous. And that's not even, again, the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the likes of Quant. So again, this is about close to 2 minutes, and then we'll come back for some closing commentary.
And I wanted to allow a harmonized way to evolve. And so that's when I started talking about interoperability, how to have different types of DLTs and different types of blockchains talking to each other. And I ended up establishing the blockchain ISO standard TC307 in 2015, and we had the first meeting. So I'm going to tell you about the story of what we're doing at an ISO level, and from a technical and a business and a governance perspective, what interoperability means. So the question I had was, why are we making the same mistakes as other technologies in the past? We've built telecom networks, we've built proprietary databases, for example, LANs, other types of networks that were proprietary, but it only happened and evolved and became mainstream when it was all opened up and interconnected. So if you recall, during the early days of the internet, we had online service providers which had walled gardens. If you're a CompuServe user, you can only talk to a CompuServe person. If you're a Prodigy, you can only talk to a Prodigy person, etc. So the question I had was, standards are a great way, and why are we making blockchain proprietary and siloed and a walled garden? So that's when ISO approached me and said the idea is really good. Can we turn this into a standard? So I read the first proposal back in 2015, and what I wanted to cover was literally what we've been talking about today. Governance, interoperability, compliance. How do we look at the technical? How do we look at the legal? How do we look at the business side of interoperability? And going a bit deeper, I wanted to cover how do we authenticate. I mean, we covered DID before. In terms of privacy and security, how do you maintain that across different systems and different networks? And how do you trust these networks?
All right, so there's this particular example. By the way, that's not my Discord going out. That was on the recording for Gilbert's. But look at some of these last things where it says the address key areas, such as the terminology, having a common language and terminology to define the interoperability of just that blockchain, right? The process and methods, the mechanism and messaging standards around inter-blockchain communication, including routing. I take a moment to reflect on it. So, for instance, a lot of times when people hear about, for instance, the likes of the ISO standard and so on, they don't quite, I guess you could say, fathom or fully understand the whole concept behind it. So let me give you guys a particular example, okay? And I understand that a lot of other people have all sorts of different examples and so on, but I'll state this much: the ISO 222 standard really does solve quite a few things at scale that nobody has ever seen before. And if anything, you've seen some that have been tested. But here's an example. So, for instance, let's say you have a huge cross-border payment, if you will. Let's say it's not even necessarily cross-border, as in the two countries are bordering each other. Look at it from a different perspective. Let's say a huge amount of money. Let's say, for instance, needs to go from Italy to South Korea, if you will. So on our particular messaging system, right? Let's say, for instance, our keyboards, if the traditional, alphabetized, A through Z keyboard standard. Okay. So, you have literally 1 through 10 on, the keypad. You have all the other keys like I, for example, mentioned. Now, let's say, for instance, it's going from point A to point B. Point A as in Italy to point B that's in South Korea, for instance. So that message is being sent, for instance, in Italian, okay? And yeah, in that message might say, we're transferring $5 trillion to this particular bank in South Korea, right? I'm not talking about traditional banks. Let's face it, probably a reserve, something huge, right, to take in that massive amount of money. And again, on the old system of SWIFT, that could be done, but there's huge fees. Now, here's the main thing I want people to understand when it comes to the messaging. So that message is sent, right? For one, it's in Italian. Two, it's with this particular mechanism of our, particular, functions of keys and so on. And it gets sent to the likes of South Korea. Well, of course, they use Korean characters. So when that gets interpreted on their end, they might only get a small chunk of what that particular message was. Well, by the time it gets sent there, basically on, let's face it, the time difference, well, something is not completely 100% verified. So if anything, the guy from point A, let's say, for instance, Rome, Italy, or Milan or something like that, he has to basically either stay up or whatever the case be, to contact the manager from, that particular location in South Korea, and basically, verify a few things. And the same goes for the person, for instance, like in Seoul, South Korea, has to, get back with that particular person. Think of how many hours are delayed on that particular transaction. It's not fully completed, and so on, right? There's an old expression. It goes, time is money, right? Means just that, but not just from the scale of what's fast, but what's also more secure. So when you have the likes of, for instance, what Quant can accomplish, right? Another example you always hear all the time is the likes of what Ripple with XRP can accomplish, right? It happens only in a few seconds, anywhere from 4 seconds to finalization of 30 seconds. So if time is money, why is time money? It has to do, again, the technologies that the likes of Quant, the likes of Ripple's, XRP, and so on offer. But not just that, but being ISO 222 compliant. That messaging system itself, being able to decipher the code instantly by making things like you see here interoperable, is tremendous. How do you find a real value as far as, like you see these prices, some of these coins and so on? This is what we're talking about here. It's huge. I know I could go on and on about this, and a lot of times I do, especially on our live show, by the way, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. But it is understanding the need of this ISO 222 standard and how much money it's going to save. I've heard, for instance, examples, right? With the old system of SWIFT, these banks would get hit with big, huge fees, like $60 billion to transfer, for instance, $5 trillion, on a cross-border payment. Now that's going to be cut tremendously with this whole thing from all this technology, ISO standard, so on. All right. I know I went on a pretty long example tangent on that particular one, but I just want people to kind of have a better perspective and understand this. Last but not least, let's go over to CMC, and you're going to see right here, Quant is listed at 117. Now, when I first started this video, it was at 110. And as you can see right here, 24 hours, within the 24-hour range, we did touch below 100. This was at 94.84. So, already Quant is taken off before your very eyes as you're seeing this video. And of course, it maybe dropped down, gone up more by the time you see this. They get out to you because it's recording. But, the Quant volume is up 75%. Let's just take a brief moment just to look at the overall crypto market cap. You do see it at 837 billion. Of course, the whole thing with FTX happened and so on. Heck, that's even up a little bit compared to what it was. And of course, you see some of the other trending ones. Bitcoin, Ethereum. It's been crazy times lately with the market, right? So, guys, that concludes our Quant coverage. I can't thank you guys enough for basically staying to the end and watching it. Be on the lookout for, of course, more Quant videos and coverage, the likes of XDC and some of the other ones we cover here at CTN. So like, comment, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit that bell notification if you don't mind. May all have a blessed day, and we'll see you on the next one.